Hello there, welcome to the Boiling Steam podcast. I am Mark Doherty, and today we have a conversation with James Ramey, the president of Codeweavers. So first we'll take a look at how Proton has advanced over the past couple of months with the jump in Proton 5.13, and we ask James what the progress is on Easy Anti-Cheat for Linux, and how that's coming along. We also take a look at PortJump and ExecMode. What exactly are those? We'll have answers to those in this podcast as well. And just a friendly reminder that we are available on Patreon at patreon.com/boiling_steam_linux. And we are also available on Liberapay at liberapay.com/boilingsteam.
So James, thank you very much for joining today. We really appreciate the time that you have for us, and I wanted to first congratulate you for the Proton 5.13 release a couple of, I think, weeks ago. I think we are all very impressed with all the work that came to this release and how much improvement it brought to the whole, Proton stack. One first question I wanted to ask you is, was there a particular reason why there was such a gap between the 5.9 and the 5.13? Did you expect that it would take so long? And was there any particular reason to pack everything into a big release this time around?
Well, I asked our senior developer on the project, Mr. Andrew Eicham, that question. And he had gotten back to me early this morning that the reality is that the upgrade from 5.0 to 5.13 was 8 months, which wasn't that much longer than the upgrade from 4.11 to 5.0, which was 7 months. And part of the reason that there's a longer gap between some of the updates is that a lot of the easier work has already been done. So when we put in chunks of work like we did for this last release, most of that work is pretty significant in that it takes a lot of time and resources in order to get those patches completed, tested, and verified. So it may be in the future that the releases are going to follow kind of that pattern. But it's driven by the work itself. So if it's not a set schedule where on July 23rd, for example, we're going to release. It's when we have enough work in a release that validates it being pushed out, and that's really kind of dictated by the number of games and the types of games and the improvement for games that are able to go into that release. So it's grown a little bit in terms of the release cycle from 6 months to 4 months, 7 months to 8 months. Will that continue? We don't know, but a lot of the easy stuff has already been done. So going forward, it's a lot of really hard work, and that involves a lot of the graphic stuff. That involves a lot of the security key stuff. That involves a lot of big projects that we're trying to include in Proton.
Nice. So I'm guessing that Codeweavers has nothing to do with the numbers inversions. So we went from 3 to 5 in a few years. I don't suppose you guys would have any idea why we jumped from 3 to 5 like that?
Well, it started in 3.7, 3.16, 4.2, 4.11, 5.0, 5.13. I'm not sure who's responsible for the number, and I think that's Mr. Eicham, but it's whatever normal culture they decide to implement. So I'm not exactly sure how they come up with the number in the way they do or why they do, but that's what they've set up, and it may have something to do with the fact that it corresponds with wine a little bit.
Yes.
So that may be part of what what's coming, and Wine 6.0 is scheduled to be released sometime after the first of the year. So it may be that the next release would be 6.0, and it may kind of tie to that, because if I were to look at Proton more closely, the number in 5.13 seems to be that maybe right now where we are with Wine. or close to it where we are with wine. So that may be where the numbering comes from.
All right, that makes sense. We had some emails a couple of I think days ago regarding the NTDL work that's currently happening in wine, and I think you mentioned that it's a lot of long-term work that will make significant changes to how you work with the kernel on the, I would say, compatibility layer. And that will probably enable to make some of the anti-cheat technologies work at some point, which they are currently not being supported in the current Proton version. Just one question on this is: do you think that work will progressively trickle down into Wine and Proton, or that is something that needs to be completed at once before you can see an actual improvement?
Actually, the first part of the NTDL work is already in Wine. It's already been upstreamed. So
all right.
It's going to be kind of trickled in. So what ends up happening is now you have a foundation and a base for that work, and then people start testing that work and determining corner cases, areas where things don't work properly, and they'll start addressing those and patching those. So it starts kind of with the initial pieces that Alexander Juilliard put into or upstreamed in Wine. They'll make their way into Proton, and then they'll start building on top of that. So hopefully here in the next couple of releases, games that have been blocked on NTDL will start to work. That doesn't guarantee that they'll all work on day one, but it's, again, the foundation for that work going forward.
Pretty good news, because I think a lot of the compatibility issues now I think most of the more recent games definitely linked to the anti-cheat software. So if there's a way around that, that would be, I think, very much appreciated by the community.
Mm-hmm. No, it's obviously something that we're very much aware of. It's you have to kind of go about it the right way. Otherwise, it looks like you're just hacking, which is not what these game developers want to happen with their games. So
right.
It's a process, but that process is moving forward, and it's actually with Alexander, it's kind of spearheading that work. It's moving fairly quickly. I mean, he's probably the most qualified individual on the planet to do this type of work in Proton. So, I mean, he is by far the best resource in this regard. So, I mean, it's in capable hands.
Yeah, I was looking at the Git history. He's been working on this particular, topic for like several years apparently. So yeah, it's definitely probably one of the experts in that field.
So with this pandemic that's still raging on since February, I believe, how are you guys dealing with this? How's the if I may ask, how's the work situation going? Are people still going into an office, or are they working remotely?
That's a great question. Fortunately for Codeweavers, we are a fairly dispersed company. Most of our development teams located in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, and so most of our developers are already separated. So they're already working out of home offices. Our local team here in Minneapolis, and we have about 25 employees. We've been working from home. We normally go into an office on a regular basis, but I've been in the office once since, I believe, the second week of March, and I'm usually in every single day. So we have a skeleton crew inside the office, but our company was built in order to kind of work in this manner. So in terms of productivity, we haven't been hampered at all by coronavirus, knock on wood. We have had a couple employees test positive for coronavirus, so we're not immune to it. And when that happens, we've had people that have had to take some time off accordingly, and rightly so. But for the most part, we've been able to weather the storm pretty well, and I think we're going to be in good shape here going forward. So I don't anticipate any issues, and we haven't seen any real issues so far.
Well, that's great to hear that it hasn't been disrupting at least your flow of operations and your progress. I think it was also one of the potential worries, of having some time between major Proton releases, like maybe this is due to the pandemic or something. But yeah, it's glad to see it's not the case.
Yeah, it hasn't been that the releases have been slowed by coronavirus. It's more, again, getting back to the fact that the work that is going into each release, and the reason that each release is getting better and better is that it's just harder work. So it's taking more and more resources to make significant improvement. And currently, I believe we have 12 or 13 developers working on Proton full-time. So we have a full staff of employees that are dedicated just to Proton work. And then we have about 1.5 QA people that are doing testing on a regular basis. So we're very much engaged with that, and we have been ramping up resources over the last year. So we've gone from about 10 to now 13 employees. So we're putting more effort into each release. It's just that the work required is
a lot more, right? Yeah, so you have basically diminishing returns, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand. One thing, quick point I wanted to address as well. We looked at the data recently regarding the number of native ports coming to Linux in the past couple of years versus, I would say, the timing when Proton was introduced. And we noticed that there was a sharp decrease of native Linux ports from, I would say, developers in general on Steam. And I don't think it's a surprise. Like, everybody was aware of this, but I think when we look at the numbers, it's actually very, very clear. It's been going down drastically since Proton released. And I was wondering, from your point of view, do you think this is intentional from game developers? Is it like they're aware of Steam Play / Proton, and therefore they don't think there is a need to produce a kind of native client anymore? Or do you think it's just like there's less focus on Linux than before?
Well, I think there's a couple elements here. Now, first and foremost, you probably have to ask the actual game developers to confirm, what their intentions are and why they've kind of acted in the manner they have. We can see kind of from a high level view that there is a lot of interest on behalf of game developers in regards to Proton. So part of what Proton provides is it allows game developers kind of easier access into the Linux market. You take your already working Windows version of a game, and you get that set up so that it works in Proton, and now you've kind of expanded into a second market without a lot of redevelopment on their end. Now, for people that aren't using the Unreal Engine, that's actually really good news. That allows them to get to market much faster without having to recompile or really change anything about their game. And it allows them to kind of focus their resources on the game itself, because we do see a lot of additional content with games these days. So there is this focal point where people are looking at Proton as kind of an entry point into the Linux market. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that, from a business standpoint, and this is someone who, we're selling into the Linux market ourselves directly with our crossover product. The Linux market is kind of being, bifurcated a little bit in that, we're seeing a lot of interest in Google and what Google's doing with Chromebooks. We're seeing a lot of interest with Manjaro as an up-and-coming Linux distro. We're seeing a lot of, Ubuntu. There's still kind of a fragmentation of the Linux market. So, if I'm a software developer and I'm trying to create the best game I can possibly create, it's really hard to kind of capture the Linux market in a big swath. Whereas Proton, it allows a Windows developer the opportunity to kind of, capture a larger chunk or the gaming chunk of Linux. So it sets a standard that you can kind of build towards that then the end users on the other end have to be able to support. So there's kind of a set of standards in place that make being in that market easier. It also makes sure that the support that you're able to provide is more streamlined than it would be if you kind of supported the entire Linux market. So there's a lot of benefits into, if you're a Windows developer, into porting to Proton. But in terms of what we're going to see in the future, I don't know how the Linux market is going to grow in terms of people developing natively in Linux. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with, what target do you try to hit? I mean, what market do you try to go for? Where's the biggest bang for the buck? And if I look across the Linux landscape, it's difficult to kind of pinpoint where the best opportunities are outside of Chrome OS, which is growing leaps and bounds, or outside of potentially Proton. So I think the businesses or the business aspect of it is that it's kind of driving towards the best opportunities for revenue. And to be very honest, and I know people kind of cringe when I say things like this, but if you're not making money, you're not producing games, and if you're not producing games, then there is no content at all for anybody. So the underlying ability to generate revenue is critical. And I know Linux gamers feel like they're second-class citizens because people don't develop games the same way they do in the Windows platform, but that's all economics. I mean, the fact is that Microsoft owns 90% of the market.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely. You can explain the fact that Proton has been a success, as in it's a more economic way to bring games to Linux, basically.
But it's also a set of standards, and I think people kind of overlook that. It's a set of standards. If your game works in Proton, then you've got it running in Proton, and then the end users have to comply with working Proton. So if your end user has Proton running on their Linux box, and you've got a game that's running in Proton, then that end user is able to run that game. Whereas if you've got Arch Linux or Manjaro or Ubuntu, now all of a sudden you're trying to support a much broader and much more fragmented Linux base of hardware and software. That's almost impossible to do with any consistency. And because it's already a very small market to begin with, now you try to get a portion of a small market, or what is the largest portion of the smallest market. That's not. It's not necessarily a good use of resources for Windows developers, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the game out there into the most hands they possibly can. And right now that seems to be Proton.
Yeah, and I'd say that another contribution there for native Linux ports is those libraries that are used. Excuse me, those libraries that are used can get outdated over a number of years, and then suddenly the game doesn't work on Linux anymore. We had a pretty interesting discussion about this a couple weeks ago. We were having this same discussion over on Boiling Steam, and so it's just pretty nice to get another perspective on this situation.
Well, and hopefully what this does in the long run, if you look at the long game, is that once there's a set of standards in order for games to operate in the Linux platform, then you've got an opportunity for Windows developers to build to that standard, whether it's Proton or not. So, one, I know that the market's valid because I'm seeing growth in the market. Two, I have a set of standards that I can build towards and I can then support. And now I've got a market that I can basically go after. And once you've got all those elements set up, whether it's Proton or whether it's using those same standards, you've now kind of got your market defined. And once you've got your market defined, it's a little easier to determine whether or not it's even viable to enter that market. But if it is, then you're going to see more and more Windows developers building native Linux games.
Right. On this topic, you mentioned that the game developers, probably make their own choices and so on. I wanted to ask you whether you think there's a higher awareness about Steam Play / Proton than before. Maybe Valve has been active in promoting Proton, I guess, on their side as well. But from your side, do you have any feedback that game developers at least are aware of this solution in larger numbers than before?
We are, and we do know that game developers have taken specific notice of Proton. So I think I can send you a couple links that you can take a look at that Mr. Eichem kind of pulled aside. Just going to pull them up quick. Yeah, I got a couple links here. I'll post them here, and you can take a look at that. But yeah, we're seeing interest broadly in from developers. Now it's not in droves yet, but a lot of indie developers are taking notice of Proton. A lot of even larger Windows developers are kind of taking notice of Proton. Again, it's an entry point into a market that is very low cost, but yet also kind of gives them the best opportunity for success. So that's, will we see more games in the future? I'm sure we will, but what it'll also do likely is get developers to start testing against Proton throughout their development process. So hopefully at some point in time, there's a lot less interaction by Codeweavers in order for games to work. Games just work in Proton.
Right.
And a lot of what we're doing is building that foundation so that framework is readily available for them on day one. Now, we've had a couple games launch day one in Proton and have been very successful, have worked very well. Hopefully that increases. And once you start seeing that increase, then you'll know that we've reached that tipping point where Windows developers are like, yeah, if I'm going to go into Linux, I'm using Proton. I mean, because you'll see A1, you'll see their game announced for Windows or Mac and available on Steam, and works in Proton. I mean, you'll see them advertising and marketing that. We haven't seen that tipping point yet, but I bet you within the next 12 months we will.
Yeah, so right now, when there is Proton compatibility, it typically is, end users trying it out by themselves and finding out that the game actually works. There's also, of course, like the whitelisting. I think that Valve kind of maintains over time. I'm not sure how actively they are still doing that at this stage. But I think there's a lot of games that actually work out of the box that are kind of, I mean, you will not be aware that they're working out of the box unless you try to launch the game with Proton, basically. So is that something that that Valve or Codeweavers is doing to make this more visible to the end users in the future?
It hasn't been anything we've done today. I do know that Valve has really promoted Proton in that regard for Windows developers. What we hear is a lot of anecdotal kind of stories about developers who just thought they'd try Proton to see if it worked with their games, and they were surprised that it did. We've heard, again, a couple stories now of late of people making sure that their game could work with Proton on day one. So, we're starting to hear more of those stories, but in terms of kind of a constant drumbeat of, Proton, we're not hearing that yet.
Right.
But I think, if Proton continues to grow, if the market continues to grow, if interest continues to grow, you'll start to see more of that. And again, the tipping point is when game developers build for Proton on day one. I mean, when they market that in kind of their synopsis of their game, then you'll know, okay, yeah, we've reached that point where Proton has now kind of become the platform, as opposed to Linux being the platform and Proton running it.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, that's good to hear. All right, so Codeweavers recently announced PortJump. Now, for those who aren't aware, do you mind explaining what exactly PortJump is?
PortJump is kind of using Wine in order to take your Windows application or game and having it run on Mac OS or Linux. So we essentially port your application or game to another platform. And kind of the hook with PortJump is, if this works the way it should work, the question is, where do you want us to send your check? I mean, because there's just an opportunity to enter, more markets using the same software. You're expanding and leveraging your investment, and we're able to help you do that at hopefully a very, very small cost. So, we've kind of formalized that because we've ported probably well over 300 applications and games just individually on itself, all the work that we've done in Proton aside. So we're working with, Windows developers around the world currently and supporting their games and applications. And we wanted to more formalize that process so that more and more Windows developers could get into both the Linux and the Mac OS markets. Now, the way things are going with Apple and some of the changes they have going on in the future, the Linux market may become incredibly attractive for a larger number of Windows developers just to get their foothold into that platform. And the same is true for Chrome OS. We kind of just announced with Crossover 20 support for the Linux partition in Chrome OS. So we're doing that work too. So we're able to support that as well.
So on the topic of Chrome OS, so as you mentioned earlier, I think it's definitely growing in terms of use and popularity, especially I think among students and schools, for example. And I think the question is any kind of gaming actually happening on this kind of Chrome OS machines, or are you think it's a market to not to expand in the future, but it doesn't really exist yet?
It's a market that doesn't really exist yet. It's very limited by the hardware itself. So you take a Chromebook that's got a 32 gig hard drive, and you have to ask yourself how many games can you actually run on a partition running inside a 32 gig hard drive. So it's kind of limited in a number of ways that are kind of hamstrung. Same is true for video card. You get a very basic Intel video card with most of the Chromebooks. So you've got limited hardware, limited storage, and the ability to maybe run 1 or 2 games at best. So in terms of, is it the next great platform for gaming? Probably not. But where the niche becomes is if you have 1 or 2 games that you really want to play, it may be an opportunity to kind of take that and make those games more mobile. So you can put it on your Chromebook and take it with you wherever you go in the world. The same is true for Windows applications. We know a lot of people that want to run Quicken and other Windows applications on the Chromebook, and this is a good opportunity to do that. But in terms of having your entire Steam library on your Chromebook, no, that's never going to happen. But the interesting thing is if you kind of read between the lines, is what's really going on out there, and you're hearing a lot more people talk about running Windows on Chromebooks. Well, you need 20 gigabytes of space just to run Windows in and of itself. No matter how you do it, that's kind of the bare minimum, bare bones. And so what I think we're going to see is you're going to see Chromebooks get kind of that. They're going to get improvements, and probably significant improvements. So it probably won't be all that long before we see Chromebooks with 100 gig hard drives, or Chromebooks that are running maybe an NVIDIA low-end graphics card, but an NVIDIA card. You're going to start seeing more of these things as those specs kind of start creeping into these Chromebooks, and it's going to be because the Chromebook is then going to be kind of that platform of choice. It's going to be that that device you take with you when you're on the go versus a regular laptop. Now, the trade-off with that is the Chromebook was built its reputation on the very longest battery life. Well, if you're running any game at all at a high-end level, you're going to suck the battery life right out of that. So the trade-off is I think you're seeing the Chromebooks kind of morph into more of a Linux laptop versus being kind of the lightweight Chromebook tablet-ish type of devices they've been up until now. And I think we'll continue to see that transition because, all the latest improvements in Chrome OS have really been around the devices themselves. Not seeing a lot of tablet-type talk anymore. Even Google's kind of pulled some of their tablet stuff off because it's just not compelling for most users. So, I think you're going to see kind of more and more capable laptops come out of Google. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're not all that far away from Google announcing their first Chrome laptop, officially announcing the first Chrome laptop. I mean, they've had a couple out on their own that have been, their specs have been kind of well above the rest of the market. And they've been kind of pulling the market more towards that end. So $1,000 or $1,500 Chromebook is probably not out of the realm of possibilities here in the next 6 to 12 months.
Well, what about things like Google Stadia or Amazon Luna? What would you say about that for Chromebooks? I think that would be a pretty good way for users to play games on Chromebooks.
Well, it is, and I subscribed to Stadia for well over a year. Well, I just turned off my subscription this month. I didn't find Stadia to be very compelling because even in my house trying to run games, I was getting Wi-Fi issues. So I literally am 15 yards from my Wi-Fi port in my house. So I'm fairly close to where my Wi-Fi is coming in. And I was running into issues running a lot of games. I was on the road. I wasn't getting a lot of games. And this is Stadia running on my Chromebook, which was fairly significant hardware specs on my Acer. So I wasn't having a lot of success. And I think if I'm reading the forums correctly, a lot of people are kind of in that same kind of boat. It's good, and the times that it runs well, and it's great, but it's hard to get into games, especially multiplayer games. It's hard to play games in terms of connectivity. And the streaming isn't always great. So there's sometimes a lot of lag even when you're in the game and you're able to actually play. You experience lag. So I know that the Stadia people are working on that. I'm sure that's priority number one for them, is to continue to improve the quality of service. But it's a very difficult task. And I'm not sure how Amazon's going to overcome a lot of those things, because I think you're still limited by the endpoint Wi-Fi. And if the endpoint Wi-Fi isn't great, or it doesn't have the ability to stream at such a gigabit speeds, I think the quality suffers. I don't know what the percentage is these days of people who have internet in their homes.
Yeah.
I don't think the majority of those people have gigabit internet in their homes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're limited by the internet, if you're limited by your hardware, then the streaming services just don't feel good. You just don't feel that same joy you do when you have things running on your box locally.
I guess like Stadia is also a play towards like technologies like 5G, where this will definitely expand the reach of very I would say high speed internet to a lot of people who don't have physical access to this kind of internet right now. So I'm not sure whether that's going to be the case or not, but I think that maybe where they can expand as the technology on 5G and so on evolves.
And that may be very true. I mean, Google is in the position where they can make a significant investment before the market is even there. So, I mean, having all the pieces in place for Stadia today for a world that may have 5G in the next 2 to 3 years across the board, that may make a lot of sense for them.
Right.
It's just in this time right now, when you're a gamer, it just hasn't been I don't think across the board satisfying experience. Which I think still kind of drives people to wanting to get the game to open on their device.
Right. I think on the topic of Stadia and Amazon also doing their own streaming services, we've heard for a while now that Valve is probably also working on their own kind of streaming services. And while I don't think they have announced anything officially yet. And there's a lot of I think supposition in terms of how this kind of service would actually work. And of course, people are thinking maybe Proton is one part of those. At the core of this kind of service, because that would make sense to be able to run and stream a lot of Windows games, even though you would not actually have Windows servers running in the background. I'm pretty sure, like, if this is happening, you probably can't tell us anything about that. But do you think that's in the realm of possibilities, at least I would say, considering the way Proton is architectured?
I don't know about in the way Proton is architectured. I know that Valve was looking at streaming services from the standpoint of kind of in-home streaming service. So you would use Big Picture, I think, as a feature for developing, where you could start playing games on potentially maybe your large screen television sets and other things. So you'd run it from your box inside your house, your Windows box, your Linux box, and then stream it to another screen inside the house. But I don't know how all that would work. But I know that the Big Picture was one of the things that they were really trying to push a couple years back. So it's obviously on their mind and their thought. And in a lot of ways that makes some sense, because people have these 70-inch large screen television sets in their homes, and there's an opportunity to do gaming off those large essentially monitors, that could be interesting. It's especially social because you can get 5 or 6 people around a large television set where you can't do that around a monitor as easily. And you can have people playing and engaging. But again, we haven't heard anything from Valve on that officially, so we know about as much about that as you do in that regard.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. On the topic of ChromeWise, I think you mentioned that ChromeWise is sharing the same architecture as typically what we see for laptops. It's Intel x86 architecture. There's also Chromebooks that are based on ARM, and they also run Linux. Some version of Linux at least. Mm-hmm. And would Proton/Wine work also on this kind of ARM-based hardware, or is that something that is currently, I would say, out of scope, for PortJump and these kind of initiatives?
It's currently out of scope. It's not working on ARM yet. Now we should have a solution when MacBooks release ARM-based devices here in the next 3 to 3 months, 6 months. I haven't heard anything officially yet on when they're going to announce, but when they release. But that's because there's going to be technology in there, Rosetta, which will allow us to essentially layer on top of the ARM device. So that's a bit different. Now, if that same type of technology were available in a Linux device or a Chromebook that runs Linux, then yes, Proton could potentially work in that environment. But the real juice with the MacBooks is that it's got that technology, so it's already kind of thinking ahead to running Intel x86 on top of ARM, and that's what they're kind of building out for. Whereas these other devices are strictly ARM only. So if it's ARM only, it's not going to run crossover. It's not going to likely run Proton at all, to the best of my knowledge.
Right, makes sense.
Going back to PortJump, so we have the standard and the Pro edition. Can you explain to us what exactly the difference is between those two versions?
I'm not sure. That might be actually a better job for our marketing people than me. Actually, the biggest difference is that between the two, and this is the one where we kind of stress these things up front with the customers, that for a customer who's like, hey, can my software just work for Linux, for example? We have a kind of a program that we can put the software through. We take a little bit of time, 10 hours, and we can answer that question, yes or no. And that's the standard product. So we determine if the product can be ported. We kind of provide kind of an outline of a quote as to what it'll cost. We'll look at any licensing issues that they might have. So do you have any third-party components inside your Windows technology that cannot easily or readily be ported? Or specifically saying that you cannot port us. So we track all those things down, and then we answer that question. And then with the Pro version, we spend more development time, and then we also provide them with a proof of concept. So we give them the software running in our technology so that they can actually try it on a Mac or a Linux computer. And those are really the two different things. So it's kind of built around that. So because we get a lot of indie developers that'll come to us and say, hey, look, we're considering this. Do you think it's going to work? And they want to be able to answer that question at the least cost, and we're able to do that. And then we have other developers that are like, well, we need to actually see it working in order to determine if this is going to be some path that we're going to go down, and we're happy to do that as well. So.
Yeah, I think one of the great innovations from PortJump, at least from how I understand it, that you have a flat fee like principle, so that you know exactly how much it's going to cost ahead of time. So it reduces, I think, the friction for somebody to actually request such services if they know exactly upfront how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, and that's really one of the things that we're trying to stress to people is that we oftentimes put a lot more work and effort into these projects than kind of what the time is dictated at. So we essentially we're technologists. I mean, we want to see if something's going to work, and really it's in our best interest to get something to work in the Mac or Linux platform. That's how we make money. So we put a lot of effort into the project, the PortJump, just to see if it's even possible. And ideally it is. And if it is, then we help the developer kind of get to that platform so that they can generate additional revenue. So in that way, our interests are very much aligned. Is that we both want to see the product working on other platforms. It's just it just takes a little bit of time and effort up front to kind of make that determination.
Right. On the subject of PortJump, I mean, you also had another announcement around the same timing as PortJump with the ExecMode. Can you give us a bit more information about what this is and how different this is from PortJump?
Well, ExecMode is, we have a lot of really, really smart people on our staff, and guys that are well-versed in everything from the underlying technology inside of web browsers. We have guys that have been working with Mozilla in the past. We do a lot of work with graphics and graphics development. We've had guys on kind of the forefront of Vulkan and other technologies. We've got all these people that are engaged in Wine and open source projects and open source technology that we really thought it might be best to try to help leverage that kind of expertise for companies that are having other technology issues of their own. So ExecMode was kind of built to take really smart people and throw them at really, really hard problems that enterprise and businesses around the world were having, and trying to come up with solutions that made sense for them. So we've really focused on trying to formalize what that might look like, and that spans everything from Linux specific issues. We have guys that can do kernel work on Linux, to dealing again with some of the graphics engine stuff, which is really kind of an up and coming and exploding aspect in environment and technology these days, to doing about anything you can imagine that involves technology. So it's really leveraging our staff to kind of a greater set of problems than just the Wine problems or just the open source problems that we're currently working on today. So we wanted to let people know that we're able and willing to do those things. And we've done a lot of Linux work in the past. Outside of Wine, we've done a lot of work for customers on their own issues, and integrating product. We do a lot of that. So we really wanted to kind of expand that, and now we have the resources in order to do that. We've been kind of running for a long time at 15, 16 developers, and I think we have close to 30 developers. So we've grown significantly these last couple of years, and we're trying to take those resources and apply them to more problems, bigger problems, and honestly, our staff loves challenges. They love really, really difficult problems, and this is a great opportunity for them to address a lot of those problems for customers and help customers get through some of those issues on their end.
Wow, that's fascinating. So Valve is one of the clients of ExecMode. Is that related to Proton, or can you relate to us what that exactly encompasses?
It's Valve is a unique animal in so many ways. We wouldn't necessarily call them an ExecMode client, because a lot of the work that we're doing in Proton is Wine work. So I mean, it really is kind of traditionally in our wheelhouse as to what we're good at.
Right.
But it's kind of spanned into a lot of other areas. So it's not just Wine work. It's graphics work. It's a handful of other things. But the core of what we're doing for Valve is based in and around Wine. But we do have clients where the core of what we're doing is based in and around Linux. And we do a lot of work with Linux and Linux security. We do a lot of work with just kind of different companies regarding graphics support. And those things are kind of more towards what ExecMode is really about, is taking other hard problems, technology, software related hard problems, and working to kind of fix those problems. But Valve is probably more in our wheelhouse as to what we've been able to do for the last 25 years, compared to a lot of other customers. I will say this about Valve though: if you talk about a sweet spot, our developers are gamers. They love games. It's kind of like your customers, your listeners are gamers. So building games to run in Linux, I mean that's what our developers have wanted to do forever. So this opportunity to actually make games work in Linux is such a satisfying project for them, because they're getting to do what they love. They're getting to kind of port things that they love, and they're getting to support a platform they love. So they're all Linux users. They're all gamers, and making more games work in Linux is just a dream come true. So we definitely thank Valve for kind of the opportunity to work on that project.
Excellent. So I guess the future for Linux gaming, I think is looking better and better, thanks to the work that Valve and Codeweavers do in parallel, in order to improve the access to number of games over time. Just maybe slightly outside the topic of Linux only, but like, what do you think of the recent Mac announcement, and in which direction they're going, and what does it mean for Codeweavers? I think you alluded to it earlier, as to their, moving to ARM, and you're planning to support them. But do you think the gaming, I would say the gaming population on Mac is kind of on the decrease, or it's gonna rebound because of the ARM announcement?
That's a really, really good question. I try to look at what Apple is doing objectively. I see a lot of concerns for gamers in the direction things are going. Pushing for 64-bit support as they did in Catalina was kind of the first step. It limited a lot of older games right off the bat. So older libraries of games really aren't able to move forward readily inside the new Apple OS environment, the Mac OS environment. So you're already losing a large number of games on Mac OS. And then when you start looking at ARM processors and ARM support, now we will be able to run on Apple ARM, Apple Silicon because of Rosetta. But Rosetta 2 is the second iteration of the technology that Apple had abandoned after a couple of years. So we have concerns too that how readily available is Rosetta going to be? Is it long term? Is it short term? Is it a long term play? And all those things impact not only us, but they impact gamers. So if you're looking at making a significant investment in your hardware, you want to be able to leverage that investment for as long as you can. So you want to say, well, geez, if I buy myself a $5,000 laptop, I want to be able to use that laptop for the next 3 to 5 years, maybe even longer. Well, with what's going on with Apple, you have to ask the question, is that even going to be possible? Am I going to be able to play the games I want to play? And while their Apple, the iTunes store is filled with games, you look at a lot of the first-person shooters, you look at a lot of the games that people really love. You look at the older games that some of them even have been discontinued or no longer supported. You have to wonder if there's a place for that in the future. And as a gamer myself, it'd be very difficult for me to kind of move in that direction. And I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same way. Like it's incredible for running new things, but is it going to support games? Is it going to support the things that I love? Things from my youth? I don't know. I mean, I'm an Apple IIc guy. I had an Apple IIc back in 1988. I've used Apple my whole life. I played Lemonade Stand and Oregon Trail. Floppy disk. I played Ultima 4 until I burned through disk after disk after disk. So I am as old school as you can get on Apple. I just don't know if there's a future for gamers going forward, and hopefully Apple will address that. And I think part of the way they address that is they actually lay out a plan and a path for people to say, listen, you're going to make an investment in our hardware. You're going to be able to play these games. These are the changes that we're anticipating in the next 3 to 5 years. Now you get to make the decision. This is something you want to do. We haven't heard that yet, so it's hard to understand whether or not what is actually going to happen to gamers in each iteration of macOS going forward.
Yep, very, very fair answer. I think we're reaching the end of the time with you today. But one last question would be do you have any particular message you'd like to share with Linux gamers in general, on the states of the work you're doing or anything else in general before we close?
Absolutely. Codeweavers loves Linux gamers, and I know that sometimes Codeweavers seems like we're at odds with Linux gamers, because I know a lot of Linux gamers want to see more and more games brought to the Linux platform natively. and porting applications, porting software, porting games, kind of it kind of goes against native. But the message that I would really like to send out is that if we can continue to build out this market, more and more developers will take the market seriously, and they'll continue to build games and applications natively for Linux. But in order to do that, it's got to be viable. It's got to have standards, and hopefully what we're doing is showing developers that it is viable, and we're helping create standards so that more and more games and applications can run natively on the Linux platform across the board, not just for a specific distro, but for all distros. So we hope that people realize that we're really strong advocates for Linux and all things Linux, and doing what we do, hopefully, creates joy for Linux users today, but also kind of makes this a more viable platform for Linux users in the future. And in doing so, hopefully, they'll get the respect and love from software developers that they deserve.
Thank you very much. I think very good closing comment. I mean, from our side, we always been very supportive of the work you've been doing over the years. We always thought that Proton was a magnificent idea to build upon what was done before in Linux, and that it's a great way to jumpstart I think what's been done in the native clients area, and to make sure we can build upon that and go to bring more games to Linux gamers in faster fashion as well. So I think we'd like to say thank you again for all the work you do, and we definitely looking forward to hearing more from you and Valve in the future. And hopefully we have a good chance to talk to you again when there's something significant happening.
Absolutely. We're big fans of Boiling Steam and kind of the work that you're doing to advocate for gaming on the Linux platform. Again, we're big fans, and we do take part, and we're on your website quite a bit. So thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, that will wrap up today's podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we would like to thank James for taking the time out of his busy life to sit down and have a chat with us. Again, just a reminder, we are available on Patreon at patreon.com/boiling_steam_Linux and LiberaPay at liberapay.com/boilingsteam. Thank you again, and have yourself a great day.